Picture this. You're standing in a hospital bathroom at 2:47 a.m., staring at yourself in a cracked mirror under fluorescent lights that flicker like dying hope. That's where Sarah Martinez found herself on October 15th, 3 hours after watching her mother take her final breath. The woman who raised her, who taught her to believe in miracles, who spent her last months whispering about the secret that changes everything, was gone. And with her, Sarah thought, went any chance of understanding what she meant. You see, Elena Martinez wasn't just any mother. For 30 years, she'd worked as a cleaning lady at the local university. But Sarah had always suspected there was more to her story. The way her mother's eyes would light up when she talked about the mysteries of the universe, the strange books hidden in her bedroom, the way she seemed to know things she shouldn't have known. But now, 3 months later, Sarah's world had completely collapsed. The medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment had wiped out everything. Her apartment was gone. Her credit cards were maxed. She was sleeping on a friend's couch, working double shifts at a diner just to afford ramen noodles. And every night, she heard her mother's final words echoing in her mind like a haunting melody. Mija, listen to me very carefully. The universe doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you are. But I never got to teach you. I never got to show you how to be different. Those words tormented Sarah until January 23rd, the day everything changed. That's when she finally got the courage to clean out her mother's apartment. She was in the bedroom, packing away old clothes, when her hand brushed against something strange behind the dresser. A loose floorboard. Beneath it, she found something that made her question everything she thought she knew about her mother and about reality itself. A metal box, heavy, old, with a combination lock that somehow, mysteriously, opened to her mother's birthday. Inside that box were things that shouldn't exist. Things that would make any rational person question their sanity. 27 scientific research journals, filled with her mother's handwriting. Newspaper clippings dating back decades about impossible medical recoveries. Photographs of her mother standing next to equipment that looked like it belonged in a physics laboratory, not a janitor's closet. And then, the letter, written in her mother's careful cursive, addressed simply, "For Sarah, when you're ready to stop being a victim of the universe and start being its partner." As Sarah opened that letter with shaking hands, she had no idea she was about to discover a secret so powerful, so revolutionary, that it would force her to rewrite everything she believed about the nature of reality itself. A secret that would reveal why some people seem to effortlessly attract success, health, and abundance, while others struggle their entire lives. A secret that the most powerful institutions in our world have spent billions of dollars trying to hide from you. Because what Sarah was about to read in that letter would expose the greatest cover-up in human history and hand her the keys to a power that every human being possesses, but almost no one knows how to use. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. Her mother's words, written in that familiar handwriting, began to reveal a truth so staggering that Sarah had to read it 3 times before it sank in. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found what I've been hiding for 37 years. I need you to know that everything you think you know about me is a lie. I wasn't a cleaning lady. I was Dr. Elena Martinez, quantum physicist, with a PhD from MIT and 17 published papers on consciousness and quantum mechanics. Sarah dropped the letter. Her mother, a physicist, the woman who cleaned toilets and mopped floors for 3 decades? She picked up the letter again, her heart pounding. I didn't clean the university, Mija. I worked there, in the basement laboratories that don't appear on any building directory. I was part of a classified research project called Observer Protocol, a joint venture between the Department of Energy and private contractors who discovered something that terrified them. Sarah reached for one of the research journals. Page after page of complex equations, quantum field diagrams, and experimental data that meant nothing to her. But the conclusions were written in plain English. We discovered that human consciousness doesn't just observe reality. It creates it. Every thought, every emotion, every belief literally collapses quantum possibilities into physical experience. We proved it. We measured it. We documented over 2,000 cases of people intentionally manifesting everything from spontaneous healing to financial windfalls to perfect relationships. The letter continued, but then something happened that changed everything. Dr. Harrison Wells, our lead researcher, cured his daughter's leukemia using our protocols. In 3 weeks, the medical establishment went insane. Pharmaceutical companies started making phone calls. Government officials showed up at our lab. Sarah found a newspaper clipping dated March 15, 1987. MIT researcher dies in car accident. The photo showed a man she didn't recognize, but her mother's handwriting in the margin read, Harrison. They killed him because he was going to publish. One by one, they shut us down. They discredited our research. They destroyed our equipment. They made us sign non-disclosure agreements backed by threats we couldn't ignore. Some of us disappeared entirely. I survived by becoming invisible, by taking a job as a janitor in the very building where I once revolutionized science. Sarah's mind reeled. Her mother had been hiding in plain sight for 30 years, working as a cleaning lady in the same university where she'd made world-changing discoveries. But I never stopped researching, Sarah. I continued the work in secret. I helped people quietly, a cancer patient here, a financially desperate family there. Always careful, always hidden, because they're still watching. They're still suppressing this knowledge. The letter revealed why. Sarah read about the economic implications of people being able to consciously create their own reality, about how the entire system of scarcity, debt, and dependence would collapse if everyone knew they had the power to manifest abundance, about how the medical industry would crumble if people could heal themselves, about how governments would lose control if citizens realized they were co-creators of reality, not victims of circumstance. The truth is, Sarah, quantum mechanics proved a century ago that consciousness and matter are inseparably connected. Every physics textbook teaches that the observer affects the outcome of every experiment. But they never tell you what that really means. They never tell you that you are the observer, that your consciousness is literally programming the quantum field that becomes your life experience. Sarah found research papers showing how different emotional states produced measurable changes in quantum probability clouds, how focused intention could influence random number generators from thousands of miles away, how groups of people meditating could reduce crime rates in entire cities. Einstein knew. He spent his final years trying to prove that consciousness was the hidden variable in quantum mechanics. Tesla knew. He said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Tesla was describing consciousness programming reality. But they suppressed Tesla's work too. The letter revealed how mainstream science had been deliberately compartmentalized. Quantum physicists studied particles in isolation. Neuroscientists studied brains without considering consciousness. Psychologists studied behavior without understanding its quantum foundations. No one was allowed to connect the dots. They created a system where the greatest discovery in human history, that we are conscious co-creators of reality, was hidden in plain sight, scattered across different academic disciplines that never talked to each other. Sarah discovered that her mother had spent 3 decades secretly teaching people how to use what she called the quantum mind code, a precise method for aligning consciousness with desired outcomes. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records showing impossible recoveries. Financial documents proving dramatic wealth increases. Testimonials from hundreds of people whose lives had been transformed. But here's what they really don't want you to know, Mija. This isn't just about individual manifestation. When enough people wake up to their creative power, the entire collective reality shifts. They're not just suppressing this to maintain economic control. They're suppressing it because conscious humans are impossible to manipulate, impossible to control, impossible to keep enslaved. The final paragraph of the letter made Sarah's blood run cold. I got cancer because I knew too much and helped too many people. They couldn't kill me outright like they did Harrison, but they found other ways. The same energy weapons they've been developing can cause cellular mutation when focused precisely. I'm not paranoid, Sarah. I'm dead. But my death will look natural, and my knowledge will appear to die with me, unless you choose to continue what I started. Sarah sat in stunned silence, surrounded by evidence of the greatest cover-up in human history. Her mother hadn't just left her a secret. She'd left her a revolution. Sarah spent the next 6 hours going through every document in that metal box. What she found was a complete instruction manual for something her mother called the quantum mind code, a systematic method for programming reality at the quantum level. The research was meticulous. Decades of experimentation, refinement, and documentation. Her mother had discovered that manifestation wasn't magic or wishful thinking. It was pure science. And like any science, it had precise rules, specific steps, and predictable outcomes. The code operated on 3 distinct layers, each building on the previous one. Her mother's notes were clear. Most people fail at manifestation because they try to skip layers or mix them together. This is like trying to build a house by starting with the roof. Each layer must be mastered independently before moving to the next. Layer 1 was called quantum coherence. Sarah read her mother's explanation. Your brain operates as a quantum field generator. Every thought creates electromagnetic frequencies that interact with the quantum field around you. But most people's minds are chaotic, jumping from worry to hope to fear to desire. This creates what I call frequency static that cancels out manifestation attempts. The solution was something her mother had developed called the resonance breathing protocol. It wasn't meditation in any traditional sense. It was a precise technique for synchronizing brainwave patterns with the frequency of desired outcomes. Sarah found detailed instructions. Breathe in for exactly 4 seconds while visualizing your desired reality as if it already exists. Hold for 7 seconds while feeling the emotions you would experience in that reality. Exhale for 8 seconds while releasing any attachment to how or when it manifests. Repeat for exactly 17 minutes. The numbers weren't arbitrary. Her mother's research showed that 4-7-8 breathing naturally shifted brainwaves into gamma frequency, the same frequency measured in the brains of advanced meditators during peak spiritual experiences. And 17 minutes was the minimum time required for quantum coherence to stabilize. Most meditation teaches you to empty your mind, her mother wrote. That's backwards. You need to fill your mind with precise, coherent intention. The universe doesn't respond to empty consciousness. It responds to focused consciousness with emotional resonance. Layer 2 was probability engineering. This was where the real science came in. Sarah's mother had discovered that every possible future exists simultaneously in what physicists call the quantum superposition state. Your current reality is just one probability line out of infinite possibilities. Manifestation is not about creating something from nothing, the notes explained. It's about selecting which probability line to collapse into experience. But most people make random selections because they don't understand the mathematics. The mathematics were surprisingly simple. Every desire has what her mother called a probability coefficient, a numerical value representing how likely it is to manifest based on your current beliefs, emotions, and actions. The key was understanding how to calculate and increase these coefficients. Sarah found charts showing how different emotional states affected probability math. Fear, doubt, and desperation actually decreased the likelihood of positive manifestation by creating quantum interference patterns. But states like gratitude, excitement, and certainty could increase probability coefficients by factors of 10 or more. This is why positive thinking alone doesn't work, her mother wrote. If you're saying, I am wealthy, while feeling poor, you're creating contradictory quantum signals. The universe responds to your emotional frequency, not your words. The secret was what her mother called future memory implantation, a technique for creating genuine emotional states associated with desired outcomes before they manifested in physical reality. Layer 3 was timeline synchronization. This was the most advanced and dangerous part of the code. Sarah's mother had discovered that multiple timeline realities exist in parallel dimensions, and consciousness could actually jump between them under specific conditions. Einstein was right about relativity, but he missed the consciousness component, her mother wrote. Time isn't linear from the perspective of quantum consciousness. All moments past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Most people are locked into one timeline by their beliefs and emotional patterns. but it's possible to shift into alternate timelines where your desired reality already exists. The technique required what her mother called quantum tunneling consciousness, using specific visualization and emotional protocols to shift awareness into a parallel reality where your goals had already been achieved, then anchoring that timeline into your current experience. This is not imagination or fantasy, the notes insisted. Quantum physics proves that parallel realities exist. This technique simply allows you to consciously select which reality you experience. But there were warnings. Timeline jumping could only be sustained for limited periods. The optimal window was 48 hours, long enough for the new timeline to stabilize, but short enough to avoid what her mother called reality dissonance, a dangerous condition where consciousness became fragmented across multiple timelines. I've seen people attempt timeline jumping without proper preparation, her mother wrote. They end up mentally unstable, unable to distinguish between realities. This is why the first two layers are essential. You must have quantum coherence and probability engineering mastered before attempting timeline synchronization. Sarah realized she was holding instructions for something that sounded like science fiction, backed by decades of real research and documented results. Her mother had essentially discovered how to hack the operating system of reality itself. The final note in this section made her hands shake. Sarah, I've programmed multiple timeline shifts to activate after my death. Events will begin aligning in your life within 72 hours of reading this. Don't be afraid when impossible things start happening. It means the code is working. Sarah looked at the timestamp on her phone. She had found the box exactly 71 hours and 43 minutes ago. Sarah stared at those words until her vision blurred. 71 hours and 43 minutes. In 17 minutes, according to her mother's prediction, impossible things would start happening in her life. She felt ridiculous even considering it. But what did she have to lose? Her life was already impossible, impossibly broken, impossibly hopeless, impossibly desperate. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, her debt collector, the man who had been calling 3 times a day for 2 months. Payment overdue. Legal action begins Monday. Monday was 3 days away. Sarah had exactly $847 in her checking account and owed $23,000 in medical bills, plus another $8,000 in credit card debt. She was working 60-hour weeks at the diner and still couldn't keep up. Perfect test case, she thought grimly. Sarah decided to try layer 1 first, the quantum coherence protocol. She sat on her mother's old couch, closed her eyes, and began the 4-7-8 breathing pattern. Breathe in for 4 seconds while visualizing financial freedom. Hold for 7 while feeling what abundance would feel like. Exhale for 8 while releasing attachment to how it would happen. The first few minutes felt awkward, forced, but around minute 12 something shifted. The visualization became more vivid. Instead of straining to imagine financial freedom, she began experiencing memories that hadn't happened yet. Walking into a bank to make a large deposit. The relief in her chest as she paid off the final bill. The conversation with Marcus where she handed him a cashier's check. When the 17 minutes ended, Sarah felt different. Not hopeful exactly, but calm, certain, like she was remembering a future that had already occurred. Her phone rang immediately. Unknown number. Sarah Martinez? Yes. This is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates. We're handling the estate of Dr. Margaret Hendricks. Did you know Dr. Hendricks? Sarah's mind raced. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. I'm not sure. She was a patient at Riverside Medical Center last year. Our records show you served her meals during her chemotherapy treatments. She left specific instructions in her will. You've been named as a beneficiary. Sarah's heart stopped. She remembered Dr. Hendricks now, a quiet woman who always ordered the vegetable soup and thanked Sarah for every small kindness during those brutal chemo sessions. I don't understand. Dr. Hendricks left you $50,000, Ms. Martinez. Her note says you were the only person in the hospital who treated her like a human being instead of a diagnosis. The check is ready for pickup. Sarah hung up the phone in shock. $50,000. Enough to pay off every debt and have money left over. from a woman she had served soup to, but it was just a coincidence. Had to be. Then her phone rang again. This time it was Marcus, the debt collector, but his tone was completely different. Sarah, I've been thinking about our situation. I know you're struggling, and honestly, I've been in similar spots myself. I have a proposition for you. Sarah barely managed to speak. What kind of proposition? I'm starting a small business, home health care for elderly patients. I need someone with your work ethic and people skills. I'm offering you a partnership. 25% ownership, guaranteed salary of $70,000 a year, plus profit sharing. And we can structure it so your debt gets rolled into the business startup costs. Essentially, you'd be debt-free and employed all at once. Sarah's hands shook. Marcus, the man who had been threatening legal action for months, was offering her a business partnership that would solve every financial problem in her life. Why are you doing this? I've been watching how you work at that diner, Sarah. You care about people. That's rare. And something told me to call you today. Call it intuition. After she hung up, Sarah sat in stunned silence. 2 phone calls in 15 minutes had transformed her from financially desperate to financially secure. The timing was impossible. The coincidences were impossible. Unless they weren't coincidences. Sarah grabbed her mother's research notes and began reading about probability coefficients. According to the mathematics, financial manifestation typically took 3 to 14 days to materialize in the physical world, depending on the complexity of the outcome and the quantum coherence of the practitioner. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. Sarah, my daughter is moving back home unexpectedly. I need the apartment back, but I feel terrible about the short notice. I'm going to return your security deposit plus 3 months' rent as compensation. Hope this helps with your transition. Another $2,400. Out of nowhere, Sarah's rational mind scrambled for explanations. But deep down, she knew what was happening. The universe was responding to her new frequency. The probability lines were collapsing exactly as her mother's research predicted. She decided to test layer 2 probability engineering. This time, she wouldn't focus on money. She would focus on something more specific, more unlikely. Sarah had been estranged from her sister Carmen for 5 years, ever since a bitter argument over their father's funeral arrangements. Carmen lived in Seattle and had made it clear she never wanted to speak to Sarah again. Using her mother's future memory implantation technique, Sarah spent 20 minutes creating vivid emotional memories of reconciling with Carmen. She felt their embrace, heard Carmen's laughter, experienced the relief of their relationship being healed. When she opened her eyes, Sarah felt the same strange certainty she had experienced earlier. Not hope, but knowledge. Like she was remembering something that had already happened. Her phone rang 6 minutes later. Sarah? It's Carmen. Sarah's breath caught. Her sister's voice, after 5 years of silence. Carmen? How did you get this number? I've had it all along. Sarah, something weird happened today. I was cleaning out Mom's old room, and I found letters. Letters Elena wrote to me after the funeral that I never read. I threw them away unopened because I was so angry. But today I found copies. She explained everything. About Dad's debt, about why you made those decisions. I've been wrong about you for 5 years. Carmen was crying now. I'm flying to Denver tomorrow. Can we talk? Can we try to fix this? Sarah hung up the phone and stared at her mother's research notes. The mathematics of manifestation weren't just theories. They were operating instructions for reality itself. And according to the timeline her mother had programmed, this was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, after Sarah had settled into her new business partnership and reconciled with Carmen, she returned to her mother's research with a different mindset. The impossible had become routine. The miraculous had become normal. She was ready for deeper truths. In the deepest section of her mother's files, Sarah found documents that made her previous discoveries seem small by comparison. These weren't just research papers about consciousness and quantum mechanics. These were historical investigations spanning thousands of years. Her mother had spent decades tracking down references to quantum manifestation techniques in ancient texts, indigenous traditions, and suppressed historical documents. What she discovered was staggering. The Aboriginal Australians call it dream time. Her mother's notes began. They understood that consciousness creates reality through what they called dreaming the world into existence. Their shamans could literally walk between dimensions, heal the impossible, and manifest resources in barren landscapes. Anthropologists dismissed this as primitive mythology. But I've studied their techniques. They're pure quantum mechanics, described in spiritual language. Sarah found detailed comparisons between Aboriginal visualization practices and modern quantum consciousness protocols. The similarities were undeniable. 4-step breathing patterns that matched her mother's resonance protocol. Visualization techniques identical to timeline synchronization. Emotional coherence practices that achieved the same brainwave states her mother had measured in the laboratory. The Tibetan monks possess manuscripts dating back 2,500 years describing mind-reality engineering. The notes continued. They teach that consciousness is the fundamental force from which all matter emerges. Their advanced practitioners can dematerialize and rematerialize objects, bilocate across vast distances, and live for centuries by consciously programming their cellular regeneration. The Dalai Lama knows these techniques work. He just can't teach them openly without being labeled insane by Western science. But the most shocking discoveries were hidden in texts Sarah had never heard of. Her mother had uncovered references to quantum manifestation in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in suppressed Gnostic Gospels, and in Vatican archives that were supposedly restricted to scholars. Jesus wasn't performing miracles, her mother wrote. He was demonstrating mastery of quantum consciousness principles. When he said, "As you believe, so shall it be done unto you," he was describing observer effect. When he walked on water, he was temporarily shifting the probability matrix of matter. When he multiplied loaves and fishes, he was using abundance consciousness to collapse resource scarcity into resource plenty. Sarah found photocopies of ancient texts describing healing techniques that matched modern energy medicine, wealth manifestation practices that resembled her mother's probability engineering, and consciousness expansion methods that sounded like advanced neuroscience. The early Christian church knew about these techniques, her mother's research revealed. But around 325 AD, during the Council of Nicaea, they made a deliberate decision to suppress this knowledge. They removed references to consciousness creating reality from the biblical canon. They turned Jesus from a teacher of human potential into a divine figure whose powers were unreachable by ordinary people. The reason was political control. Sarah read documentation showing how rulers throughout history had used spiritual disempowerment to maintain social control. If people believed they were powerless victims dependent on external authority, they could be managed. If people understood they were conscious co-creators of reality, they became ungovernable. This pattern repeats throughout history, her mother wrote. The Inquisition targeted witches, who were really just women practicing manifestation techniques. The conquistadors destroyed Mayan and Aztec texts containing consciousness sciences more advanced than anything we have today. The British Empire systematically suppressed Vedic knowledge that included detailed instructions for what they called reality engineering. But the most disturbing discovery was how this suppression continued into the modern era. Sarah found evidence that the same families and institutions had been deliberately hiding quantum consciousness knowledge for centuries. The Rockefeller Foundation didn't just shape modern medicine, her mother's notes revealed. They shaped modern education to systematically exclude consciousness sciences. They funded universities with the specific requirement that consciousness be treated as separate from matter. They created the artificial divide between science and spirituality to prevent people from understanding their creative power. Sarah discovered that major pharmaceutical companies had secretly researched consciousness healing for decades, but buried the results because spontaneous healing couldn't be patented or sold. Oil companies had suppressed research into consciousness affecting physical matter because it threatened their control over energy resources. Banking institutions had funded academic studies proving that scarcity consciousness kept people in debt, then used those findings to design advertising that reinforced financial limitation beliefs. The most powerful families on Earth don't just hoard money, her mother wrote. They hoard knowledge. They've been using quantum consciousness techniques for generations to maintain their wealth and power while ensuring everyone else remains ignorant of these same techniques. Sarah found documented evidence of secret societies dating back centuries that preserved manifestation knowledge for the elite while creating religious and educational systems that taught powerlessness to the masses. The same bloodlines that controlled medieval banking now controlled modern central banks, pharmaceutical companies, and media conglomerates. They don't worship money, her mother's research concluded. They worship consciousness. They understand that consciousness is the fundamental creative force of the universe, and they've spent centuries ensuring that only they know how to use it intentionally. But Sarah's mother had discovered something else. Something that explained why this knowledge was finally emerging now, despite centuries of suppression. "We're in what the ancient texts called the Great Awakening," her mother wrote. "A planetary consciousness shift that happens approximately every 26,000 years. During these periods, the quantum field becomes more responsive to human consciousness. Manifestation becomes easier. Telepathy increases. People start spontaneously remembering their creative power." Sarah found astronomical charts showing how Earth's position relative to the galactic center created predictable cycles of consciousness expansion. Indigenous cultures had tracked these cycles for millennia, predicting that the current era would bring the return of the dreamers, people who remembered how to consciously create reality. "This is why they're panicking," her mother's final note read. "This is why the suppression has become so obvious, so desperate. They know their control system is failing because too many people are waking up to their true nature as conscious creators. The quantum field itself is supporting this awakening." Sarah closed the file and sat back, overwhelmed. She wasn't just inheriting a personal manifestation technique. She was inheriting humanity's suppressed evolutionary potential. And according to her mother's research, she was one of thousands of people around the world who were destined to remember this knowledge and teach it to others. The revolution had already begun. 6 months after finding her mother's hidden research, Sarah Martinez stood before a crowd of 300 people in a Denver community center. But this wasn't the same broken woman who had discovered that metal box. This was someone who had proven to herself and others that consciousness truly does create reality. The transformation hadn't just been financial, though her new business had already generated over $2 million in revenue. It hadn't just been personal, though her relationship with Carmen was stronger than it had ever been. The real transformation was deeper. Sarah had become someone who understood her true nature as a conscious creator of experience. And she wasn't alone. After quietly helping 50 people apply her mother's techniques with documented success rates of over 90%, word had spread through networks that seemed to operate outside normal communication channels. People were finding her through dreams, through synchronicities, through chains of impossible coincidences that defied statistical explanation. They came from every background imaginable. Doctors who had exhausted conventional treatments and were secretly researching consciousness healing. Business executives who had achieved material success but felt empty inside. Single mothers struggling to survive who somehow knew there had to be another way. War veterans with PTSD who were spontaneously experiencing healing through meditation practices that resembled her mother's protocols. "You're here because something inside you knows that everything you've been taught about reality is incomplete," Sarah told the crowd. "You're here because you've experienced moments where the impossible became possible, where synchronicity replaced struggle, where your consciousness seemed to bend reality around your intentions." She looked out at faces that reflected her own journey. People who had been labeled dreamers, failures, or delusional by a society that demanded they accept limitation as natural law. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on a friend's couch, working double shifts to afford ramen noodles, convinced that I was a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Today, I'm financially free, emotionally healed, and teaching others how to access the same power that transformed my life. What changed wasn't my circumstances. What changed was my understanding of who I really am. Sarah had discovered that her mother's research was part of a much larger phenomenon. Similar discoveries were emerging simultaneously around the world. Scientists in Japan were publishing papers on consciousness affecting quantum fields. Researchers in Germany were documenting cases of intention influencing random number generators. Medical facilities in Brazil were quietly integrating consciousness healing protocols with unprecedented success rates. This isn't happening by accident, Sarah continued. We're in the middle of the greatest consciousness revolution in human history. The same power that your ancestors knew how to use, the same creative force that built the pyramids and inspired the greatest achievements in human history, is awakening in people everywhere. But Sarah had also learned about the resistance. The same institutions her mother had written about were working overtime to discredit, suppress, and ridicule anyone who taught these principles. Legitimate researchers were losing funding. Social media algorithms were suppressing content about consciousness sciences. Mainstream media was pushing narratives of scarcity, division, and powerlessness with increasing desperation. They're not just suppressing information, Sarah explained. They're suppressing human evolution itself, because they understand something that most people don't realize yet. When enough individuals remember their creative power, the entire collective reality shifts. Wars become impossible when people understand that external conflict reflects internal discord. Poverty becomes impossible when people know how to generate abundance through consciousness. Political control becomes impossible when people recognize themselves as sovereign creators of their own experience. Sarah had been tracking the numbers. Her mother's research indicated that when approximately 10% of any population achieved quantum consciousness coherence, it created what physicists called a phase transition in the collective field. Social problems began resolving spontaneously. Crime rates dropped. Economic inequality decreased. Environmental healing accelerated. We're approaching that tipping point, Sarah announced. Not in decades or centuries, but in years, maybe months. The question isn't whether this transformation will happen. The question is whether you'll be part of creating it or part of resisting it. She could see the recognition in their eyes. These people had been drawn here not just for personal transformation, but because some part of them understood they were meant to be teachers, healers, and catalysts for collective awakening. Your mother, your father, your grandfather didn't have access to this knowledge when they needed it most, Sarah said, thinking of her own mother's final words. But you do. Your children, your community, your world is depending on you to remember what humanity forgot and to teach what humanity needs to learn. Sarah outlined the practical steps. Master the 3-layer code individually first. Document your results carefully. Share the knowledge responsibly with people who are ready to receive it. Create support networks with others who understand these principles. Most importantly, live as an example of what becomes possible when human beings remember their true creative nature. This isn't about positive thinking or wishful hoping, Sarah emphasized. This is about quantum mechanics applied to human consciousness. This is about reclaiming your birthright as a conscious participant in the creation of reality. As the evening ended, people weren't just taking notes or asking questions. They were making commitments. Doctors pledged to integrate consciousness healing into their practices. Teachers promised to subtly introduce these concepts into their curricula. Parents committed to raising children who understood their creative power from birth. Sarah realized she was watching the birth of an underground revolution that would transform human civilization from the inside out. Walking home under the Denver stars, Sarah felt her mother's presence more strongly than ever. Elena Martinez hadn't just hidden knowledge in a metal box. She had planted seeds that were now growing into a forest of awakened consciousness. The universe doesn't give you what you want, her mother had said. It gives you what you are. Sarah finally understood the complete truth of those words. You don't just manifest things into your life. You manifest yourself into the person who naturally attracts, creates, and experiences the reality you desire. And when enough people remember this truth, when enough individuals align their consciousness with their highest potential, when enough human beings stop being victims of reality and start being its conscious architects, everything changes. The revolution wasn't coming. The revolution was here, and it was just beginning.